Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Gelobet seist du Jesu Christ, which translates to Praised be you, Jesus Christ. All in all, this is a pretty interesting chorale. It's modal. It's in G mixolydian, but it's not purely modal in the sense that it is true to the fact that it stays in the G mixolydian mode the whole time, but it definitely stays mostly in sort of a modal pitch collection if it's not modulated to another key, and that's really evident here at the final cadence of the piece. But we start things off with no key signature. We start on G major, we end on G major, so this, is not a half cadence at the end. It sounds very much perfect, authentic. So we're in the key of G major, but it has mixolydian flavor to it. So we'll start off with a 1 chord. And because this is more of a modal chorale, you're going to see that some of the progressions are not normative, at least not using the same harmonic vocabulary that we're used to seeing in Bach's writing. So we go to E, B, E, and G. That's an E minor triad in root position. That's a 6 chord. We have C, C, E, and G. That's a C major triad. It's in root position. That's a somewhat unusual progression, but not uncanny. Not uncanny, unprecedented. And then we have F, A, F, and A. F, C, F, and A. That's an F major triad, and this sounds like a very stark change, but the melody still doesn't feel like we've left the key of G major yet, so this is definitely a flat 7 chord in the key of G, before we go to E, C, G, and G again with this passing tone in the tenor, which would be another 4 chord. Here's where the melody starts to take the turn. Right before the cadence, we have A minor, A, E, A, and C, which is our 2 chord. But in the key of A minor, that'll just be our tonic. There might be an argument to be made that it modulates earlier, like this would be a 6 chord, this would be a 3 chord, and this would be a 1 chord, but this is honestly where it sounds like it modulates to me. Hovering in and around G this entire time just makes it sound mostly in G territory for me. We then have G sharp, F, B, and D. That's G sharp fully diminished 7th in root position. And then we cadence on A minor with the C and the tonic, so this would be an imperfect authentic cadence. So moving ahead, we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of G, and I think we modulate right off the bat to G major. So this A is now our 2, and then we have E, E, G, and B, which would be our 6. So we're kind of going reverse around this cycle of fifths right now, because we expect 6 to go to 2. No real reason why it can't go in the other direction. But then we get B, D, G, and D. That is a G major triad in first inversion, so 1, 6. 6 going to 1, 6 is kind of interesting. And then we have C, C, G, and E with a passing 7th in the tenor. That is a root position C major triad. That's a 4 chord. Then we have D, A, F sharp, and D. So here we are breaking that modal rule, because we're seeing the leading tone here in one of the inner voices, and we get the dominant, the major dominant in the key right here. So we have G, D, G, and B. That is a root position G major triad, our tonic. We then have D, D, F sharp, and A. It's a D major chord in root position. And then we have our tonic G major with the tonic in the melody as well. It's a perfect authentic cadence. All right, looking ahead, we have a very interesting phrase here. There is a D minor in the phrase here, which would be staying true to the mixolydian mode, because the 5 in the mixolydian mode is a minor chord if you spell it up triadically. But I'm going to call this a perfect authentic cadence. I don't think it's a half cadence, even though that's effectively what it's functioning as in the grander scheme of things. But he extends the dominant beyond the ending of the phrase, which makes this feel, even though it kind of has a dominant feel to it, really it's more so a perfect authentic cadence, because we have the dominant of the dominant going to the dominant, and we're hovering in and around D as a tonic figure towards the end of this measure right here and the next system. So here we have E, B, E, and G. Again, starting off the phrase, or at least in close proximity to the beginning of the phrase, having a 6 chord. In fact, the second chord of each phrase, or the first chord of each phrase, depending on if you include the incomplete measure, has been a 6th chord, which is really interesting. Definitely a modal nod because of the fluidity between the chords and the fact that composers of Bach music earlier than Bach's music didn't have the same tonal relationship. It had not really been codified yet. Here we have A, C, E, and C. We'd be tempted to call that a 2 chord, but I think what's really happening here is it's actually a 7 chord because it's F sharp, A, and C. So this would be a 7-6 chord actually, but I think they're more or less achieving the same thing. 6 wants to go to 2 anyways. But then we have G, D, G, and B, which is our tonic triad, and I think it makes more sense for 7 to go to 1 than for 2 to go to 1, so that's why I analyzed it that way. We have a passing tone in the bass as well before we get B, D, G, and D, which is a tonic triad in first inversion. Then we have another passing tone going on in the bass before we get D minor. So I think instead of calling this 5, we can call this G major chord 4-6 in the key of D minor, or D. We'll just say D here, or D/D. That's something that we did in a chorale not too long ago. We can call this 4-6 in the key of D, and it could be like a modally mixed chord, but we get the D minor here. It just sounds like it sounds like something has already happened before this point, so we'll call this our tonic triad in minor. Then we have a passing 7th there in the tenor as well. We then have G, B, E, and G, but I think this E is an accented non-chord tone. This B natural is just really interesting in the grand scheme of things because we get D minor and D major in such close proximity to one another. So this is another 4 chord in root position. Or maybe it's a 2 chord or 2-6 in comparison. Or a 4 chord or a 2-6. I think they're more or less achieving the same thing as a predominant functioning chord. We then have A, C sharp, and E. It's an A major triad in root position, which is our dominant, passing 7th in the tenor, and then we have D, F sharp, A, and D, which is our tonic, our major tonic in comparison to our minor tonic. I think that's one way to look at it. Maybe he is using the D minor as a chord that we modulate. If you listen to the chords in this chorale, it sounds very otherworldly in comparison to Bach's other music. So I've, I tried to not listen with as much caution because it really is more expressive than anything else. But here we have a long phrase to end the chorale. Really, the chorale, for all intents and purposes, really could end like in and around here, but we have a longer contrapuntal phrase that's filled with suspensions before we get the final cadence, which I'm calling a Plagal Cadence, in the key of G, like G mixolydian, and the key of G mixolydian, that doesn't really make much sense, but in the G mixolydian mode. But I think we stay in D for a little bit longer, at least until we get to this region right here. So here we have another D major chord, D, F sharp, D, and D. So that's a incomplete D major triad, but still a D major triad nonetheless. Passing tones in the lower voices, F sharp, A, D, and A. It's a D major triad in first inversion. And kind of in the same way of the previous phrase, what I'm thinking is that this inverted chord here might be a 4 chord in the key of A/A minor. There's this mixing between minor and major. We have it in D here, and we have this A here that doesn't really get... I think there are a couple of different ways that you could look at this, but I'm going to present this analysis first. So this D major chord could just be uppercase 4-6. We get some passing tones, and then we get our tonic. But in this case, we get our major tonic first rather than our minor tonic because he's flipping the order in which they're introduced. Here we get 4-6 going to minor 1, and then we get a cadence in D major. But here we're getting an A major chord, and then we eventually get to A minor. So whether or not this is happening here, this analysis is kind of conflicted by the fact that this bass line really sounds like a D dominant progression, right? We have the F sharp, but the C natural here in the bass. And by the time we get the C natural, the rest of the chord kind of confuses things anyways. But regardless, we'll just keep analyzing this way. We have some passing tones in the bass and the alto. Here we have C, D, F sharp, and A. That would be another uppercase 4 chord, but in this case it's 4-2, like a harmonization of the melodic minor scale, right? F sharp, G sharp, and A. That's my logic here, is that we're getting melodic minor now in A, and that's sort of eliding with the D dominant in the bass. So whether we modulate this early or whether we modulate around here, it's like a zone, you know, there's like modulation going on in and around this area, these 3 beats. I just said it's on the earlier side because I see parallels between the way that he's treating D and the way that he's treating A. So that's the way that I'm choosing to analyze it. You might have a different analysis. Share your analysis with me if you find issue with it. But next we get B, D, G sharp, and B. That's G sharp diminished over B. That's a 7-6 chord, so the fact that we have 4 going to 7-6 is a good sign. And then we have A, E, A, and C, which is a minor triad, root position. And then we have A, C, F, and A. We've seen that F major triad before contextualized as a flat 7 chord. We could even kind of do like a little flat 7 there to further distinguish it, other than saying like an F sharp major chord that we would expect in the key of G. But I think if we see an uppercase 7, we already make that leap, we make that connection that it's putting the flat in front of it just further reinforces it basically. But here we have A, C, F, and A, our F major triad in first inversion, so 6-6. And I think that we could say we modulate here, but I think it's more likely that we modulate on this beat. We have C, C, E, and G, which is a C major triad in root position. And if we move to the key of G, like a mixolydian, like in the mixolydian mode, we can just call this a 4 chord, and we get the F sharp as well. So I think that it's happening in and around here. So we have like a passing 7 chord here, F sharp, C, A, and A, so a little bit of a 7-6-4 here, or just a 7 chord, depending on whether or not you feel like the passing tones should take into account the bass. In this case, I think they do, because it's something that 4 and 7 have in common. Alright, and then that goes to G, B, D, G, and B, which is 1-6, G major in first inversion, passing tone in the bass. And here's where we have to sort of look with a grain of salt, or a little bit more of like a liberal eye, because of the fact that this is like a very contrapuntal ending. What I think is happening here is really we have this D in the bass, and we have D, D, G, and A, but I think this G is a suspension over the bass. And really what's being implied here is a minor 5, like really bringing home the fact that we are in the mixolydian mode to cap things off at the end of the chorale. So I think this whole section, these 2 beats, are really implying 5, even a little bit of 5-7 maybe with the C in the bass. But I think the C is an accented non-chord tone, even though we get a little bit of voice exchange going on, C against D and D against C here. So maybe there's a little bit of a 7 going on here. I don't know. 5-7 is a chord that we would expect, but the fact that it's minor, that's pretty unprecedented. I haven't seen any chorales that have a minor 5 in a major-ish pitch collection, right? And here we get E, B, E, and G, this F being a 9/8 suspension over the bass. That would be a 6 chord, so a bit of a deceptive progression, or an adjacent progression, depending on how you look at it. I don't really think minor 5 has the same implications that major 5 does, because it doesn't have the same leading tone movement. Here we have like a descending C major fragment in the alto, and I think that that's more indicative of what's really going on here. So maybe it's 6, who knows? Or maybe this is 5-7, who knows? I'm not really super knowledgeable of Bach's mixolydian writing. But then we have D, C, E, and G, this D being an accented non-chord tone, this actually being a 4 chord in root position. And then we have the bass, just keeping the G across. Here we have G, C, E, and G, so that would be taking the same chord and turning it into 6-4 before the 5, or sorry, not 5. I'm expecting 5 after a 6-4 in a cadential situation, but it's 4-6-4 going to 1, which would be an example of a plagal cadence. I have a couple of embellishing neighbor tones in the inner voices as well. All in all, this is a super fascinating chorale. The minor 5s and the flat 7 chords are definitely a hallmark of the Mixolydian mode, so there's no question that this chorale is modal. To what extent is up for debate. I think it's also really, I think maybe even more interesting than the modality is the mixture of major and minor, right? We see the minor dominant and the major dominant being used, right? Lowercase 5, D minor being used as well, D major being used in close proximity, A major and A minor being used in close proximity to one another. Lots of modal concessions that Bach is making to be true to the melody, I would imagine, because if these BWV, the way that the chorales are categorized with any semblance of historical, like, chronology, like if they're cataloged in historical order, it seems that Bach is just writing with different harmonic vocabulary whenever he wants, and the fact that he could switch that off and on is very interesting. Whether or not I need to go into sections like this one right here, like with the 4 going to the flat 7, going to the 4, and say that that's actually like a 1-4-1 progression in the key of C major, I don't know how granular I need to be. But all in all, I'm really just using the melody and the inner voices as a guide for when I think modulations are happening and what key we're in or what pitch collection we're using at any given time. So I'm using my best judgment, and that's all I can really do in cases that we're looking at a chorale that has some modally injected material in it. But that being said, thank you so much for watching the video and continuing to support the channel. I release a video every single day, an analysis of a Bach chorale, so if you're into that sort of thing, maybe think about subscribing to the channel or tuning in and checking the playlist. Right now this is episode 114, I believe. Wow, it's crazy that I've made 114 of these. If you stay consistent, you really do make progress, and yeah, this is wild. But yeah, if you're into analysis, if you're into Bach, if you're into getting into more of a theory outlook on historically important music, this is the channel for you, and I hope I can provide you with interesting content. That being said, thank you again for watching, and I hope you take care.